Hello, and welcome to the panel discussion on EU's Green Deal amidst evolving security landscapes. The panel examines the impact of the evolving security landscapes, such as NATO membership and Russia's war on Ukraine, and the implementation of the EU Green Deal from different perspectives. You can join the conversation in the chat via the QR code on the screen. And if you continue the discussion in social media, you can use hashtags Eurooppa-foorumi, Eurooppa-forum, and Turku. The panel is hosted by Åbo Academy University. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Meri-Tuuli, and welcome to everybody here in the audience. My name is Wilhelm Bainer Rasmussen. I'm a professor at the School of Business and Economics at Åbo Academy University. It's my pleasure to be moderating the panel. As distinguished speakers here, we have Heidi Hautala, former member of the European Parliament for many, many years, a long distinguished career in politics. You've done many things. Christian Panch-Hatti, my professor colleague at Åbo Academy University, marine biology, environmental and marine biology. You're a professor at Åbo Academy University. And Raija-Leena Ojanen, legal advisor at the World Wildlife Fund. It's a pleasure to be entering this discussion to hear your takes on the topic for today. We've heard the heading of the panel. We've heard that it's about the EU's Green Deal amidst evolving security landscapes. We've heard the key words of Russia's war on Ukraine, NATO membership, and so on. At the same time, we clearly see that there are two rather different issues here. We could easily have a panel just on the Green Deal. We could easily have a panel just on the evolving security landscape and its implications for the environment. But we will be trying to focus on the intersection between these topics for the remainder of the panel. You are encouraged to ask questions at the end. I hope we can save some time towards the end for that, and this also concerns those who are following us via online. There is a chat possibility, so you can, and we will get your questions here. So hopefully we'll be able to catch those at the end. But now to get started, we have an overarching theme question for this year's Eurooppa-forum, and I would like to pose that to Heidi Hautala. We have Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We have the rise of extremism in Europe, all over Europe, I guess we can say. We have a weakening, many say, of the axis between France and Germany. That's been a driving engine for the EU for as long as it's existed. And then we have a uncertain situation in the United States. And all of this compounds to a certain level of uncertainty about the European Union's ability to act going forward. How do you view this situation, and what are the likely future developments, do you think?
Well, I do think that the EU has its market power. It's still the biggest internal market in the world. And through that, it has been able to introduce the most far-reaching program for linking economy, society, and environment. And I don't see any time that there would be a U-turn or even a kind of a suspension of any of the decisions that have been taken or cancelling those. Because I believe that already, let's say in the corporate world, it's understood that they also have their responsibility on environment and human rights. And then I'd like to say that I think the EU has quite a good foresight capacity to understand that there is, let's say, we are in a kind of a some call it perma-crisis, some call it polycrisis, which means that there will be one crisis after the other. of course, I'm not like a sorcerer, but I'm saying that it's very likely. So the EU now has another 5 years to put in place a platform that will sort of be able to give the interlinkages of the various crises, and we cannot overstep the importance of, let's say, the climate crisis. And we understand very well that economics and climate are a big part of what we now call economic security. So all of this, I think, shows that the EU has to continue to do what it has been doing. There are weaknesses, and I just like to sort of get back to what you said about France and Germany. That may weaken the ability of the EU in decision making. We also see something that we will discussing in other panels here is that many, especially of the Central and Eastern European member states, are kind of falling back a little bit to autocracy, even corruption, things like that. So it's not promising. But I would say that the European Commission and the European Parliament have a very important role to keep their role as a driver of these new agendas that arose with Ursula von der Leyen 5 years ago, which are not going to be stopped.
Thank you. Can you say something more about the foresight capacities that are being brought into play here on behalf of the EU, just to give us a bit of background to the decision making?
Well, I think, but this is also in the United States, that it's understood that the decision making should be based on sound, let's say, science. Let's take the example of the climate law. Mm-hmm. It has a direct reference to the responsibility of the decision makers to adapt the targets and also not just the targets, but also means to the changing understanding of climate change. So this is a kind of a foresight that I think is useful. But there is a kind of there's a whole cell around the European Commission's president, serving, of course, any president that happens to be eliminated, appointed and elected. So there is a foresight capacity, and decision makers should listen more to that foresight capacity. Let's see if the member states are able to do that as well.
Mm. Thank you very much. Now let's move now a little bit closer to our interest in the Green Deal and what that means. Now, as you've heard in the audience, we have people from a diversity of backgrounds here who have a diversity of angles on the topic. And now the question I would like to pose to all three of you, from your perspective, what touch points do you see between the Green Deal on one hand, so what the EU is trying to do, the initiatives the EU has put on the table to become climate neutral by 2050, and the current security landscape in Europe? So we're looking for the intersections between the two topics here. And maybe I pass the ball to Raija first. What do you see when faced with these keywords? The Green Deal on one hand, security landscape on the other hand. What's coming up on your agenda?
Thanks, Ville, and thanks for inviting WWF and myself here. This is a very, very important subject. And my background, I'm a lawyer, just so you know. My background is in business law. Most of my career I worked as an attorney for business, and now I've been a panda for quite a while. And we really think that it's an important nexus, the climate, nature, security, which is coming up a lot. The hard security players, the NATO, is talking about climate and its impact on kind of the defense security. So this is an important subject, and it's rising. There cannot be any peace without sustainable development, and there cannot be sustainable development without peace. But the main argument that I maybe would like to throw into the discussion here, that maybe the Paris Agreement, which aims at limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, and the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Pact are the most important security pacts of our time. Because if we cannot control the changing environment and put in place these mechanisms to ensure resilience in the societies, the things just don't work. And it's on this basis that I agree with Heidi that the EU cannot backtrack too much because this is just too important.
Thank you very much. I pass the ball to Christian then.
I can just sign the last words that this is just too important to follow up on. So I'm a marine ecologist, so I see that from that environmental perspective, and I've worked in different scenes in Germany and Sweden and now in Finland. So I've worked around the Baltic Sea, so I know a bit of those research landscapes, and I know how important this whole aspect of acting together has been for the Baltic Sea. This is one of the very big and good examples how you can start at least. There's much to do still, but you can start to manage a sea and environment from the multi-country perspective. But you have to act together. You have to talk. You have to act in a common sense. And one concept I think I just wanted to bring up here in this light is that if I do my research on the marine environments and the impact of human pressures, I do often categorize those into global drivers, into regional drivers, and into very local drivers. And this plays is a really big base here in those discussions. In that sense, the global may be warming, acidification of the oceans. I'm a marine ecologist. It may be eutrophication in the Baltic Sea in particular, and it may be very local pressures, boating activities, point pollutions. And we have to address those from the different possibilities we have in the different combinations. And within the Baltic, those regional drivers, we can only work together, but we have to work even larger outside the EU if we want to address the global drivers. So those are my main thoughts.
Have you already seen some impacts on your work, on your research work, of the development in the security situation?
We have just briefly had this discussion yesterday in the working group meeting, and quite interesting. We see this already. It's been there. We have less and less access to depth data in the Baltic Sea, which limits our basic research, but also applied spatial planning research, and that has been more and more implemented and will be more strictly in the future. If it comes to macrophyte underwater vegetation, we see that there's limits put on. Okay, what is the data that are publicly available? And those data are limited. So we see this in our basic research, but also then in the spatial planning we do, where to put a new wind farm, etc. So we need those data, and we're limited already in that regard.
Yeah. And this is a reasonably new challenge, but is there any way of hedging against those risks from your perspective, or do you cannot kind of go around the fact that you don't have access to this data?
I mean, new regulations will have to come into place, how to use data, how to provide data to society, and how to make them openly available, and that there will be limitations. So processes on getting data will be more complicated, will take more effort and time, and we will have to be more restrictive in how we publish those. We will have to keep things in mind that we didn't need to do before as much, at least.
Thank you. Moving on or back to you, Heidi, then the overlaps, intersections between the Green Deal and the evolving security situation. What do you see?
Yeah, first of all, you asked if we believe that the EU will reach the climate neutrality target of 2050. Yes, I think there's one very interesting phenomena now, which is that the courts are actually obliging states and public authorities to act according to their commitments, which they are not doing. Finland is a very clear case, and we already have now the second court case in Finland by environmental and human rights organizations, which may have a chance of legal standing in front of the courts now. So let's see. But I would sort of maybe build a little bridge from this observation to the role of citizens and to what we just heard. In every debate, I'm also learning new things. I understand that there's limits to public access to information, which also worsens the conditions of research. And I didn't believe that I would hear this. Anyway, so there are international instruments where I think one could maybe try to challenge such decisions, which I, of course, would have to understand better. But there is the Aarhus Convention. Finland is, and the EU is a signatory, which guarantees access to environmental information to all citizens, with some exceptions. And I've been actually in front of the European courts to challenge some limits by European Food Safety Agency, case that I won with other colleagues. So I would say that whether this new agenda of linking, let's say, environmental security, including, of course, climate very much, with other security issues, depends on how much citizens are given sort of leeway and possibilities to participate in decision making. I think it's absolutely vital. And also what I can see now, that as I hinted, that many enterprises are also actively like demanding legislation. They're demanding corporate sustainability due diligence legislation, because they say this is coming, and the front runners will be in a very bad competitive situation if they don't have, if companies don't have the same rules everywhere. And the EU is in a good position not only to do it as it has done now in its own domestic legislation, but also to reach out to the wider world. So I think there's a lot happening, and my bitter observation, and that's maybe one of the reasons why I've left politics, is that I feel that in general politicians are far behind of understanding that we are in a sleepwalking society. If we don't have the capacity to change course and transform, it will be a loss for everyone.
Thanks. Many exciting themes that we could continue from there. I'm going to get back to you, Raija, about the law aspects, and we might also delve into the enterprise aspects at some point during the panel if we have time. But first, back to you, Heidi. Still activating citizens, motivating citizens to be active in the current landscape. What do you see as important there?
Well, I mean, the civil society, the NGOs here represented by WWF have played a key role in pushing for the green agenda, and also pointing out to the interlinkages between environment, climate and security. So, well, I must say I was really disappointed or discouraged to see that the true Finn new member of the European Parliament, Sebastian Tynkkynen, he said that we should basically stop financing this kind of civil society, well, a certain type of civil society organizations, and all that money should be transferred to military help to Ukraine. We just simply cannot afford putting these things against each other. And of course it will be costly on both fronts.
Yeah, this tension or purported tension, that's another thing we will get back to. But first, Raija, Heidi paints a picture here of the role of NGOs through law in upholding protection, environmental protection, and that way supporting or ameliorating the security situation at the end. That's the chain of logic that we're sketching here. What's your view on this?
There's a interesting situation where there's more and more rules and regulations on environmental matters, and then on the other hand there seems to be a lack or even reluctance to enforce them, to implement them. So governments kind of want to have the cake and eat it, kind of hold on to the political power to do as they wish, even though you have statutory laws and regulations in force. And that's the balance that we now have to navigate. The climate case here in Finland, WWF is not formally part of that, but I've been in the advisory group in the background. It's very, very important to give courts the opportunity to define where the current legislation extends, and in that way push the power people to do as they need to do. I think it was in some UN report saying that the greatest paradox of our time is the inability to act where the science is so clear and we already see what's happening. It's even in Finland and Europe, we see it in front of our eyes how the climate change is unfolding, and still it seems to be very difficult to make the decisions. And something that I very much regret, and maybe we sometimes think that did we NGOs miss something earlier? Like the nature restoration law, it was painted so toxic here in Finland. So we went maybe not in time to defend kind of the good sides, that restoring nature helps nature to be our ally in fighting climate change and bringing benefits and resilience to the society. But maybe we were a step behind, and some forest lobbyers got in front of the game, and now then the Green Deal has to be renamed Clean Deal because the green has somehow become
it's a part of identity politics, which is a real pity.
Yeah, is that how we should? This is a bit of a digression, but is that how we should understand this new label that the Commission President has recently brought forward? So it's gone from the the Green Deal to the Clean Industrial Deal. Do you see this?
It was Riikka Purra who started it. You know. Yeah. It was definitely Finland who went from the Green Deal to Clean Deal, because green is somehow toxic. And I mean, this is so backward that I cannot imagine. But listening to Ursula von der Leyen, actually, I think there is the big potential, if you talk about Clean Industrial Deal, that now a lot of the attention has to be given to big economic players, big industry players in the green digital transformation. I cannot regret that at all. And I actually don't think that this naming in practice means much, but it's a symbolic gesture which shows that environment has been instrumentalized in some kind of quite childish political games. And that has to change. And I think because there are more and more citizens who see through this, and I would again like to call for active citizens to say that, look, this is what we need to do. This is not something that will be damaging our societies. And maybe one more sentence is that Ursula von der Leyen now, I think she has this idea of having a commissioner for intergenerational fairness, if I'm not mistaken. And that's a great idea, because it kind of, it brings climate and environment and resilience. Raija mentioned resilience in society into the discussion in a new way. And that has a bit of to do with this forthcoming UN summit for the future. So future intergenerational issues could also be a hook to take the environmental and climate security agenda further, I think.
Yeah. Again, we might get back to, or we'll get back to many of these. But first, to Christian, the restoration law was mentioned here is part of the Green Deal, and it highlights biodiversity, and it combines an overarching restoration objective with binding restoration targets. And it's been a very hot topic, as we're all of us, I think, aware, a very hot topic in the Finnish debate. But from the perspective of ecology, and maybe not talking only about the situation in Finland, but generally, how should we think about this law? Do you have a view on that?
Restoration is a central part of maintaining ecosystem functioning, of regaining ecosystem functioning. So it is a crucial aspect that we need to follow up on. But we should also keep in mind that restoration needs to be done where ecosystems are capable of being maintained. Because if we don't improve the state of, let's say, the Baltic, the Archipelago Sea, or other places worldwide, we won't be able to restore those places, because the environmental pressures are still remaining. So we have to reduce those first before we can really implement restoration. at least if we want to go where we've been. So restoration is important, but mitigating climate, regional and then local pressures is equally important. And there's a big term called nature-based solutions nowadays, yes. and that is in everyone's mouth, and people are talking about it. But that the first step would be to maintain ecosystems in their state where they can function, where they can produce services that we benefit from, may it be oxygen production, recreation, fisheries, etc. So the first would be to keep those, and then they provide their services, their solution to problems.
Thank you. I see both Raija and Heidi nodding. What are your takes on the restoration aspect here?
Well, I would continue on what Raija said about this lobbying against the law. I mean, it was really ruthless, and I would say that these events that we have all witnessed in Finland in the last week or whatever, on the destruction of this important stream in Suomussalmi and this Raakku. I think I learned the name in English, but maybe someone can help.
Freshwater pearl mussel.
Freshwater pearl mussel. I mean, it actually then has now revealed how dirty this game has been. And I think this is a crucial moment. It's not that there is too much talk about what happened and why happened, who was responsible, because it reveals a bigger picture. And lobbying against environmental protection and nature protection is a very damaging part of all this. And I would say that in general, access to information, transparency of decision making is more important than ever.
Thank you. Raija.
What I see as a lawyer, maybe lawyers look at things from this perspective, but there seems to be a battle between voluntary versus mandatory. And there are a lot of forces that would like to keep environmental protection voluntary, and then they fight against the nature restoration law. It's a mandatory law. It sets legally binding obligations. That's why it's so important. You have to then comply. But the trend is to keep things voluntary to allow for companies to find their best ways to do things. And this this deregulation tendency that's also in Ursula von der Leyen's political guidelines, that's a bit scary. We fear that the deregulation is camouflage for putting environmental standards lower, and same kind of things seem to be happening here in Finland too, where the government says that we're going to uphold the environmental commitments and we won't lower the environmental standards, but still there's leeway and exceptions are being brought into legislation where it's been more binding. So this is the battle here.
Heidi, I think you were indicating earlier that companies play an important role in reaching our targets with regard to the environment. How should we put that into this perspective, where, for example, the Clean Industrial Deal has been interpreted as a way of cutting red tape for companies, or a way of making sure the European industry is competitive and can produce clean solutions in the future, so we reach the target?
Well, one interesting, I would say, a novelty in the EU legislation of the past 5 years is the look at this sort of value chains of what we produce and consume, and also not just the products but also services. And this shows that many companies now realize that because they will have a mandatory obligation to make sure that they don't have serious adverse impacts on environment or human rights or labor rights in their value chains, all the way back to raw materials. They have to start a kind of a new business model in a kind of a business structure. And there are many companies that are already doing it, because this is not out of the blue. This is based on international standards of at least 20 years, 15, 20 years. So I actually believe that the companies will be able to also to show to decision makers that they need a kind of a, what they call level playing field. And so there's a great potential because, as I think already Kofi Annan, when he was the UN Secretary General, he said that governments and international organizations of countries can never alone meet the global challenges or solve them. So companies need to have a role, and then that's why we have now UN Global Compact. We have a lot of different, let's say, business associations who are working for sustainability. I would say with like really serious intention. So I think this is a very bright aspects to me. And I mean, just look at the reputational damage that Stora Enso now has. It's one of the many. When it happens, it can hit really hard.
So you're tracing a shift towards the positive in this.
Yeah, I mean, if I have some hope anywhere, I think it's through the citizens' active actions and then of the sort of new mood in the corporate world.
Thank you. Now, the changing security environment, it has some very obvious negative consequences for the environment and for environmental protection and attention, maybe especially to environment and climate related risks. But so we tend to spend more on security, as you alluded to before, and we spend more on defense. But is there also some gains to be had for the environment from this situation? For example, as a consequence of the energy transition. What's your take on this? Raija, would you like to start?
Well, I think the more kind of the political decision making understands the connections, maybe then the security is not so toxic as a political motivator to really put money into climate and nature matters. Because here, like in Finland, it just seems that there is absolutely no interest in putting official money or budget money into nature activities. But then on the other hand, security and defense and armed forces, you know that's where they really want to put money in, and we fully understand that that's an important element too. But combining the two, it's not getting the mode where it's not either or, but it's both at the same time. Like nature and climate should not be separated. They are two sides of the same coin. So you should kind of solve the nature loss and climate at the same time with the nature-based solutions and things like that. Then also here the security issues need to be combined with the climate situation. So I'm hoping that it gives boost and gives the right to think about these things, maybe from a fresh angle, which is not so identity politics, or where the identity politics all point to the same direction.
Yeah. Can we outline some causal change, maybe making things clearer for the general public that way by opening up the causal chains from environmental protection to security? Do you see any potential there?
Well, we try to cooperate with different parties to bring this forward, but it's of course relatively complicated, I guess. But what I think is important, like I named, that when NATO comes out and they have written about climate change, kind of the big boys within the hard defense, when they talk about it, then it gains momentum and people trust that, okay, this is important from the defense point of view.
Thank you.
So we would hope our president also would be talking about climate maybe more.
Thank you. Christian, what's your take on this? Can the attention we pay now to the security environment, can that translate into something positive from an ecological perspective?
I was just discussing this also with my wife and had really difficulties also like this general topic. And one thing is that if you think really locally, it may be like a border that has increased, may increase a protected area because there's no activities in in a border area. This is a very minor thing, but it maybe to see something in there. But I think at a much larger scale, this energy sector has now shifted much more to local energy production, which means wind farming, renewable energies, but also much more diversified because there was a quick pressure that had to be followed up on. So I think in this case, if we play this game right in terms of implementing renewable energies at places where it's most sustainable, I think we could gain from that situation at the moment, if we can gain at all.
Yeah, I think that's an obvious benefit that now that, for instance, the EU has understood its dependencies on, first of all, Russian fossil energy, but also on the critical raw materials that are needed for the green digital transition. I mean, there will be gains, but could I also say that what worries me is this new rush towards the critical raw materials in order to have the electrification happen, because nobody has estimated really the huge, let's say, collateral damage that will happen when sourcing cobalt and nickel and what they call, I think, rare earths. It's all very great to get rid of the dependencies of China, but now that the sourcing is towards Africa, Latin America, and also Europe itself, very much so Northern Europe, like the Swedish and Finnish Lapland. So I think these connections should be understood much better, and the consequences. And I have a feeling that the decision makers are not taking these risks very seriously. And of course, then there will be battles about let's say, critical raw materials, which mean that there could be local fights between companies and local population. I was a bit shocked to see that Anglo-American Sakatti, which is now dreaming about a mine in northern part of Finland, Viiankiaapa, which is a very, let's say, strongly protected area, that they even have their own guards. It sounds like Latin America, that company guards that are making sure that the indigenous peoples are not coming to their so-called territory. So this is a security aspect that has to be understood. But then it's now said that nature is the silent victim of war, and this comes from the work that I've been involved in. This comes from Margot Wallström, the former Swedish Deputy Prime Minister, who is chairing this international working group on environmental consequences of the Ukraine war. And what we in that work try to do is to make sure that nature is not anymore the silent victim of this war. And the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, is very serious about accountability for the environmental consequences, the destruction and damage on biodiversity, on also other aspects of environment. And I saw that just a couple of days ago, there was the news that Ukraine has now decided to join the International Criminal Court, where they already, I think there's some case going on about this. So impunity of war crimes dealing with environment should be stopped.
Right, but overall, what I hear you say is that the deteriorating security environment is largely negative for the environment, even if there are some
clearly
positives.
Clearly,
that's a clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there needs to be accountability.
Climate change and biodiversity loss can also be seen as security issues in themselves. For example, they drive conflicts, they drive migration, which could translate into different kinds of security issues. How should we think about this interplay between climate and biodiversity on one hand, and more traditional military security? Christian, what's your take here?
I mean, we see what consequences a war in itself can have on biodiversity locally. So there is no question that should be tried to prevent it from the first place. And I'm not the one saying what it needs in terms of keeping peace between countries. So that's not my area of expertise in that sense. But I just know that any kind of war conflict will be on the costs of environmental destruction. So in that sense, we need to keep a balance between both, and certainly. And you said this from in the very beginning, right? One fosters the other. So we need to keep dialogue. We need to keep peace to work on local, regional, and global environmental problems, because they would in turn then increase the risk of new conflicts, of new migration, big migrations of people, which then lead to new conflicts, etc. So I think we have to work on a dialogue, but also environmental issues, and try to challenge ourselves with improving the state at the different levels of.
Thank you. Raija.
The WWF published a report with the think tank Adelphi some years ago. It's called Nature of Conflict and Peace. And these issues were examined there, and now I don't remember the actual percentages, but it's clear evidence that conflicts happen where there's battle over reducing resources and people have to leave their homes. So the connection is just so clear. And we in the Western world should be more paying attention to how this plays out and make sure that there's an equitable world kind of going forward.
Thank you. Heidi.
Yeah, I think there's very little to add to what we have just heard from both colleagues. And it was interesting, Raija, that you mentioned that NATO also is sort of taking into account climate change as a security risk, and maybe we're not far from the days when the NATO members really start to properly to discuss these things. That it's not like it's a secondary issue, climate change for security. And I mean, I've understood that President Alexander Stubb has hinted that. Environment and climate change are very, very important, but first we have to deal with the hard security. And if I have not misunderstood him, I think this cannot be true, because unfortunately we have to address both and understand the linkages much better than we do at the moment.
So from your perspective, this is a fundament of resilience in the current...
Yeah, you said it. I think resilience, and I think Raija also said resilience of society. That's one thing, and of course including adaptation to climate change, which then helps people to conduct their lives where they live. Mm.
Maybe you are familiar with the Global Risks Report that the World Economic Forum publishes every year. And this year in January, they list like 10 most critical issues in a 2-year perspective and in a 10-year perspective. The 4 top for the 10-year perspective are all environmental concerns. The breaking of the Earth's systems, the climate change, the kind of the disasters that come with that. So if we take anything that we take a view that is longer than just next year, these are the most important issues that the humankind needs to solve pretty quickly. So let's get going.
Thank you very much. Now let's see if we have something in the yes, we have a question in the chat. There have been a few farmer protests over the last few years in relation to environmental protections and laws. How does that affect the EU security landscape? Heidi, would you like to start?
Okay. Well, I mean, some people in Finland think that elokapina is too aggressive and radical, but look at what the farmers did in Brussels. They were just throwing shit into supermarkets. So, you know, there are protests and protests. And I would say that however this movement was mobilized, all movements are mobilized, they are not spontaneous. So it was pretty successful because it was a part of the campaign against the nature restoration law. It was very much a call which then happened to weaken the environmental regulations of farming. Not all of them, of course, but some. I think it goes without saying that one of the major challenges now is the food system. How to change the food system without making it too hard for the farming community. But this has been evaded for a long time. And it's very clear. I listened today. Today is the day of the Baltic Sea. And I listened to a researcher say that what we all can do is that we can stop eating too much meat and dairy products, that we should have more plant-based foods. That also, but how can we have this becoming a non-identity issue? That is common sense. It's also good for health. It's good for society. So yes, the farmers, unfortunately, they are in a weak position, and then they protest, and then the decision makers think the solution is to weaken the environmental aspects. What can you do?
We have time for a question from the audience. Anyone up there? If not, let's start rounding up here. Yeah. Thank you very, very much. Heidi Hautala, Christian Panchatti, Raija Ojanen, I'm so sorry. and I thought I should not get this wrong, so that's why I got it wrong. And to the audience, it's been a pleasure for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.